go ahead and do this post-fight reaction. My post-fight reaction for Sean Porter versus Terrence Crawford, Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter, was I'm happy because I was right. So I got my video out pretty much less than an hour before the fight started, and I pretty much predicted a lot of the key factors in the fight. A lot of the key factors in the fight. My original prediction when I was making the video, or when I recorded it, was an 8th to 9th round stoppage, but then I edited the video before I posted it, which was before the fight, to say a mid to late round stoppage. So it's still around the same range, and then the fight was over in the 10th round. And some things that I predicted was this: that Terrence Crawford wasn't going to stop the fight with straight punches. It was going to be, I was feeling like it was going to be a little bit similar to how he beat Yuriorkis Gamboa, which was that I felt like some of the punches he might use to be really effective would be to catch Sean Porter with some type of a hook uppercut variation, or throwing pretty much a check hook, or a overhand lead right, a overhand lead, right over the jab. And that looks like that's pretty much what happened. He caught him with a left hook, left uppercut variation from southpaw. And when he threw that, boom, caught him. Then he came back, boom, hit it with it again, some right hooks, right over the gloves, and he was right in there, right? Another thing I feel like I predicted well was that Terrence Crawford's ring generalship played a big part in the fight, played a really big part in the fight, because he has really good feet, really good ring generalship. Another thing I felt that I got right was that it wasn't as much, I said it was going to be the roughhousing, but also the athleticism of Sean Porter that was going to create some problems for Terrence Crawford, right? His athleticism, as far as his foot speed and his head movement to get in and out. I don't think I brought up his head movement like I should have, but I think I forgot to. But I didn't bring up the head movement in the video. But that was one aspect of it. All right, another aspect of it was I was talking about how Terrence Crawford had a better chance of stopping Sean Porter than Errol Spence, because, or Keith Thurman, or Errol Spence, or Adrian Broner, or any of those guys he fought. Because one thing I've noticed about most of the top fighters at 147 pounds is once you get to the top, you start to play it safe. Most of the top fighters at 147, they're knockout artists early in their career, and then as they get to a higher level, they stop going for the knockout because it's the big money division, and if you take a loss in the Floyd division, then it's not worth the loss. So one thing about Terrence Crawford I talked about in my video, which is that Terrence Crawford has a really big ego, and he likes to destroy opponents, not just beat them. So Terrence Crawford will put himself in the way because he trusts his power. It's not just ego, he also trusts his power. Great power in both hands. One thing I talked about is that when it comes to Errol Spence Jr. and Keith Thurman, that they typically take their foot off the gas of going for the knockout if they don't see that it looks like it's going to happen within the first few rounds, or if they naturally don't wear you down to that. But that Terrence Crawford is the type of fighter who he's just looking for that one punch that's going to rock you while he's systematically rocking you to sleep the whole time he's fighting you, and looking for that shot. So while he's looking for that shot, he's going to force and he's going to create that shot, that opening, to where he could, I'm sorry, it's like, look for that opening to where he can force the knockout. Because Terrence Crawford is one of, if not the best finisher in the sports, but he's one of the best finishers in the sport. And a lot of that due in part is to the dog in him. And I'll talk about that dog that's in the video, about how Sean Porter was going to try to rough him up, that he was going to try to frustrate him, and that Terrence Crawford might lose some of the early rounds because he's a slow starter, and that Kenny Porter and Sean Porter probably came up with an idea to try to bag some of those early rounds. And then right after I said bag the early rounds, kind of started going into talking about how then Terrence Crawford is going to go into seek and destroy mode, and he's probably going to be successful when he goes into seek and destroy mode, unless he gets caught. And I didn't think that Sean Porter had the power to do it. One thing I also brought up was that let's say we were talking about how Sean Porter got hurt by Gamboa. I said that pound for the division that they're in, Gamboa was a bigger puncher for 135 than Sean Porter was for 147. So I didn't think that Sean Porter's power was going to be as big of an issue, but it was possible. Let's say, what else was going on? I'm trying to see, what else was it that I talked about in that video? Well, just look on my YouTube page. Just go ahead, look on there. Crawford versus Porter. Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter, full fight breakdown and prediction. And I talk about all that stuff in there. I also talk about certain specific things. I talk about Terrence Crawford's punch variety and his angles, and how he can create power from unorthodox angles with looping punches, and that was another reason why Terrence Crawford was a bad matchup for the chances of getting knocked out. Sean Porter getting knocked out, because Terrence Crawford can generate power moving forward. He can generate power moving backwards. He can generate power in the right hand, in the left hand, and all the way up into the 12th round. Now, he's a slow starter, so he's not necessarily going to be a one-punch knockout artist like that. But, not a one-round knockout artist, but he still is a one-punch hurt you artist. You get what I'm saying? Because, there's different types of power. Errol Spence is more of he's going to hit you with the thud. He's going to either break you down or he's going to box. And if he has to fight, he'll fight. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if he fights, he's going to go ahead and get you out of there. Most of the time, that's what that means. But this is a higher level of boxing. This is a higher level. And Terrence Crawford has shown that he separated himself from the pack. One thing that I did say in my video, too, was that Terrence Crawford deserved more credit for his Kell Brook win than he was getting, because everybody was saying that Kell Brook was washed up or damaged goods, and I didn't think so. I thought that Kell Brook was boxing well at the beginning until Terrence Crawford found his rhythm, and then he found his shot and he got it off. And in the fights with both Gennady Golovkin and in the fights with Errol Spence, Kell Brook was looking good in there. But then they systematically broke him down through wearing him down. And Terrence Crawford didn't wear him down. Kell Brook was undefeated after he fought Errol Spence in a higher weight class. And then he came back down, and then he said he was feeling good. He was in good shape. And then when he fought Terrence Crawford, he got caught with a shot he didn't see coming, and that shit rocked him. He was legitimately rocked. I didn't see him being so much legitimately rocked versus Gennady Golovkin or versus, Errol Spence. I think another thing I talked about, I just compared different aspects of the fights, just, breaking it down through the opponents, the common opponents they had, not common opponents, but through previous opponents. And I broke it down from the perspective of, what's his name? Jeff Horn being a tough and rough fighter. And, Sean Porter had a little bit more athleticism. So the way he handled that, I will say that Sean Porter did a good job. I was glad to see what I saw in there. It was some good shit. It was a good fight to me. It was. Sean Porter was getting a little dirty in there, and then Terrence was getting a little dirty back with them punches behind the head. I seen you. But one thing I really liked about Terrence Crawford's game was that, see, the footwork, they really had a battle of footwork. And Terrence Crawford was fighting off of rhythm. And Sean Porter was fighting off of trying to disrupt that rhythm that Terrence Crawford was setting. And in him trying to disrupt the rhythm that Terrence Crawford was setting, the difference between the two was basically just Terrence Crawford's ring generalship and his ability to use hand traps and head control. So some of those punches that looked like they were behind the head punches were really Terrence Crawford establishing head control. He would, avoid the rough housing on the inside, or try to, because that headbutt, I thought it was going to end the fight early, but he was able to avoid a lot of the rough housing on the inside. I like the way Terrence Crawford was able to cover himself up and avoid punches. I like the way he was able to get on the inside where the dirty boxing was going on and still cover up and protect himself. And I thought he might be able to. Well, when I was watching it, I was like, "Damn, what's going on?" I thought he was going to be able to get his rhythm together a little bit better to start counter punching sooner. Sean Porter, his head movement was amazing. That's one thing I thought about it a little bit, but I didn't watch the full fight with him and Danny Garcia, so I didn't see the full improvement that he made in his head movement. But that head movement made Terrence Crawford miss a whole lot. To me, a lot of those rounds early on were real close, and some of those rounds went to Porter. But Terrence Crawford is he's no new person when it comes to losing some of the early rounds. Floyd used to lose a lot of the early rounds, you know what I mean? So let's say we're looking at the situation from that perspective, then we can say, you know, earlier on for me, what in the rounds that were close, I gave the close rounds to Terrence Crawford because of his ring generalship. People don't give that enough credit. If you're like two punches away from each other, the person who is controlling the other person's body, the person who is controlling where the fight is taking place, that's the person who's in control of the fight to me. Now, what I would have liked to have seen more from with Crawford is that in times where he got Sean Porter into the ropes, he would have won those rounds if he would have capitalized on those moments. So, you have to use that ring generalship. You have to use that control and do something with it. So a lot of the times, Terrence Crawford would, use control. He would, use his angles and his positioning to get himself outside of the punching range of Sean Porter, or he would push him up against the ropes, just to show his physical strength, which people weren't expecting. I knew Terrence was a dog, and I knew Terrence is very physically strong. I knew that from watching him, just watching how he dealt with Jeff Horn, and how Manny Pacquiao wasn't able to deal with Jeff Horn that same way. That Terrence Crawford is a very physically strong guy. So he was, pushing Sean up against the ropes, but when he got Sean to the ropes, he didn't do anything with it, right? Uh, Sometimes he would get outside and then he would just, wouldn't really do anything with it when he got outside of certain ranges. But at the same time, Sean wanted to fight in that brawler range, and Terrence Crawford has some of the best check hooks in the game. Some of the best, because his lead hand, no matter what angle he throws it at, has knockout power on it. So when he throws that right hand from the front, it may not look like much when he's throwing that check hook, but those are some cracking shots. What I also like is, and that was kind of what I was talking about too, when he comes back with the check hooks coming back, and then he takes a half step back with the check hook up front, and then comes back with that hook hook uppercut variation. And he started off just throwing it to the body. We've seen it in some of the middle rounds where he would throw the check hook up top, right over the gloves when he throw, a left hook, or I mean when Sean Porter would throw a left hook or a jab, and then he would throw the check hook right over the top, and then take a half step back and then spring himself into a looping left hook, left uppercut variation. And that was a technique I really liked and I really enjoyed seeing. And then he eventually closed out the show using very similar techniques to that. I did like how I saw Terrence Crawford periodically breaking Sean Porter down, and finding his shots until he's seen the shots that he could get, and then he got him out of there. It's exciting to watch Terrence Crawford because, you know, there's a lot of faith you have to have in yourself to fight like that. I don't think Terrence Crawford is a fighter who fights to win rounds. I think he's a fighter who fights to go in there and try to get the knockout. And I think I remember him having an interview where he talked about that before. Like, Terrence Crawford can win rounds. He definitely can win rounds. But in what I've seen a lot of lately from him, especially this being his 8th or ninth consecutive knockout, is that Terrence Crawford is far too much getting in the habit of giving too many rounds up earlier on that he doesn't have to, right? And maybe he's just a slow starter and he has to get his rhythm, and after he get his rhythm, he's on go. But let's say if he's fighting Errol Spence, and I do, and I have thought that Terrence Crawford is somewhat of a better fighter. He doesn't have better defense than Errol Spence, but his foot speed is impeccable. He has a longer reach. His punch variety is better. I think he probably has more heart than Errol Spence. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't really seen Errol Spence in a position of adversity, or I haven't seen that same tenacity in him. I've seen some dog in him. I've definitely seen some dog in Errol Spence. But the dog I've seen from Errol Spence is from the perspective of him being always the top dog in that situation already. So it's just someone giving a little bit of adversity back to him, and then he's going for it. I've seen Terrence Crawford get hurt and then turn the dog on. But most of the time, when Terrence Crawford get hurt, it's his own fault. Terrence Crawford has certain tendencies in the ring that, he's probably my favorite fighter right now. My top 4 fighters I like to watch the most right now would probably be in between. I said that in the video. Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, Canelo Alvarez, and Gervonta Tank Davis. Those are probably my 4 favorite fighters to watch right now. There may be some other people I haven't thought of at the moment, but those are the 4 that I would think about right now that I really enjoy watching. And what else? Let's see. When we're really breaking down this fight, like really breaking it down, I just thought that the way that Shawn Porter used his footwork and his head movement, and to slip, come up with punches, or to punch, slip down to come up with punches, or to punch, slip out the way. They really tried to study and get Terrence Crawford's tendencies down to a T, right? They really tried to do that, and that was some good stuff. I like what I saw from the Porter camp when it came to their ability to show that Terrence Crawford is not an unpredictable fighter. All right, so that was still some good stuff. That was still some good stuff, and that was a good fight, a good tactical war. But really, it was that control and that ring generalship that eventually broke down Shawn Porter. I saw the setup for the knockout coming in the first couple of the few rounds. You know what I mean? Even rounds that Terrence Crawford probably technically was losing in the eyes of others, with the ring generalship that he was using, with the control that he was showing, with the emotional discipline he was showing, and with the way that he was really taking his time and getting loose, I just saw it coming. But at the same time, there were definitely times where Terrence Crawford tried to get loose, and Shawn Porter wasn't having that shit. There's definitely times where Terrence Crawford was trying to get into his bag, but just Shawn Porter would not allow him to set his rhythm. The roughhousing didn't work as well because, Terrence can get dirty too if he wants to. Also, if you come in too wild, Terrence is going to throw a check hook, and if it hits you in the back of the head, it hits you in the back of the head. You know what I mean? That's just how that's how he moves. You know what I mean? And I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at it. There was a little bit of dirty stuff going on. There was that headbutt. There's some wild shit going on. And I thought it was dope. I thought it was a really excellent fight. I don't know if I'd necessarily say fight of the year, but I was definitely excited about it. From a technical perspective, it probably was low-key fight of the year for me thus far. If you really want to look at it from a sweet science perspective, because these are like 2 of the best fighting each other. That's a beautiful thing. But I ain't gonna lie. Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder, that fight was amazing. I still think Tyson Fury cheated. People probably gonna downvote this video just for saying that. I still think Tyson Fury cheated the second fight, and probably the first fight too. But he didn't get caught cheating this time, so he didn't cheat this time, and it doesn't matter, right? They made it all the way to the 11th round. Deontay Wilder looked like he had his legs, he had his foundation to him. Deontay Wilder was good. He just gained too much weight before the fight, and he just didn't have the skills to pay the bills. And the reason why I brought Deontay Wilder up is because Deontay Wilder needs to go back and watch this fight. Deontay Wilder needs to watch Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter. Why? Because he needs to see how to fucking protect himself when he's, in close quarters. That is a master class of how to protect yourself when you're fighting a rough housing fighter, right? Now, it's like a master class of how to protect yourself when you're fighting a rough housing fighter. So Deontay Wilder had no frame of reference when he was fighting Tyson Fury about how to make sure he was taking care of and protecting himself once he got into close range. You can't just wait around for the referee to break it up. Even if you're not going to fight your way out of inside, you still got to be able to carry yourself without just letting them lay all their weight on you. You gotta control. Some of these boxers need to take some wrestling classes or some Greco-Roman wrestling or something. You know what I mean? Some Krav Maga or something. Or go take some lessons with Roberto Duran about inside fighting so you can really learn. Learn some hand wrestling, learn some hand traps, different things like that can really help you when it comes to boxing. When you really know how to move this hand out the way, throw that punch in there. You know what I mean? You know how to, and Deontay knows some of this stuff already, right? He knows some of this stuff. Like, he has some knockouts where he'll, paw out with the jab. And then when he paw out with the jab, he'll use the jab, sticking it out, to pull the hand down and throw it down the pipe. I'll say this right here. Terrence Crawford's style is kind of like a switch hitting, slightly less powerful, but like a switch hitting, pound for pound wise, like a switch hitting, more technically refined Deontay Wilder. Like, when you look at his, his reach being very long for his division, you look at his wiry frame, his muscular but wiry frame, but with a lot of power, and with his ability to generate power through whether it's looping shots or whether it's straight punches right down the pipe. Terrence Crawford has certain aspects of his style that remind me of things that Deontay Wilder could really learn from. A Deontay Wilder could probably benefit from, doing a little training with Bomac. But at the same time, I do like what I've been seeing with Malik Hunter and Deontay Wilder. I thought that's a beautiful thing. There was definitely some improvements made, and you can't expect a fighter to improve but so much with a brand new trainer for their first fight with that new trainer, and it's the best fighter in the world, right? Two things can be true at the same time. You can be someone who cheated and still be someone who's the best. Just like a lot of people feel that way about Canelo Alvarez. They say, well, they still call him Canelo, but some of the same people still call him the #1 pound for pound fighter. But for me, I'm going to go back to saying Terrence Crawford, the #1 pound for pound fighter. You know what I mean? Because, hey, Bud is the Bud. You feel me? Bud is the Bud. Now, I wonder what else aspects I haven't covered in this particular match yet between Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter. Yes, I know this is probably part people waiting on. That stoppage. I personally felt like Kenny Porter knew that Terrence Crawford is one of, if not the best finisher in the game when it comes to smelling blood and going for the kill. He knocked Sean down twice already. That first one looked like it was a flash knockdown, a little stun. The second one, Sean was hurt. I don't think it's necessarily him being way more hurt than he's ever been before, because Sean has a great chin. But, and I'm not sure if they were in a state where there's a 3 knockdown rule. If there was, I don't know. But at the same time, you could tell that each time Terrence was turning it up, and as he was turning it up, each time he was laying his hands on him a little bit worse as he was turning it up, systematically breaking him down and hitting him with those one-hitter quitters. And or the one hitter hurters. You know what I mean? And I don't see Sean really having made it out of that round or making it past the next round. I just don't really see that. But when I heard what Kenny Porter's reason was, like when I saw the stoppage, I'm like, you know what? That seemed a little premature, but I get it. You got to protect your fighter. You got to protect your son. But Kenny Porter, it sounds like an egotistical asshole. That reminds me, I was watching King Richard last night. It reminded me of King Richard a little bit, but I love King Richard. So when you have that type of vision, you're a father or something like that, and you're a trainer and a father, sometimes you're going to overstep those bounds in ways where you're no longer benefiting them. You get what I'm saying? And when you get to that point, it's where you kind of got to stop, kind of like Angel Garcia. There's different father-trainer dynamics that kind of had to end. I'm not sure if they're still together right now. They might be. I know they're still cool, but I'm not sure if they're still training together. But that happens. Sometimes you have that trainer dynamic with your parent, and you're a grown ass man now. You know what I mean? But what I really like, though, I like the humility from Sean Porter. Very humble guy. He still wanted to fight, but he didn't get mad in front of people. He was like, you know what, my father, he saw something, and we have an unspoken agreement. He probably felt the same way that Deontay Wilder did in the second fight with Tyson Fury, but with more grounds to feel that way, right? But instead of making excuses where he threw his father under the bus, he decided to take responsibility and accountability for the fact that he allowed himself to be in that position, and he just accepted the decision that his father made. But when his father threw him under the bus, talking about he didn't like his preparation and that the fighters think they know better, I'm like, listen, nigga, why would you throw your own son under the bus and then put Terrence Crawford on such this pedestal? Your son was in there fighting one of the best pound for pound, if not the best pound for pound fighter in the world, and he was winning several rounds. And there's going to be 2 rounds left. I don't think Sean Porter would have made it through. You saw what my prediction was. He doesn't necessarily have to take more punishment, but I don't know. Maybe if there's a third down knockdown rule in that particular state, that, if he was able to make it through the rest of that round without getting knocked out, without getting stopped, on a 3 knockdown rule, then you can say, okay, cool. You shake off the cobwebs in between rounds, you're good. You know what I mean? But if we're looking at it from a perspective of no 3 knockdown rule, you might just go ahead and just stop that fight. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm being honest with you. If there's a 3 knockdown rule in that state, then don't stop the fight. If there's a 3rd knockdown, then that'll be the end of the fight. But if he can make it through the rest of that round without getting knocked down again, then he can continue to the next round. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I would look at it with how much time was left in the round. So I thought that was just interesting in how that worked. Let's see what else was going on. Before too long, I'll give my prediction on Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. and some other fights that are coming up. So, this Coach Brody, I'm out.